This is a captions test. This is a captions test.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Tran, and I'm the Senior Manager for Community Engagement for Durham for Metrolinx. On behalf of Metrolinx, I'd like to welcome everyone viewing online to this information session focused on the Durham Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit project in the town of Whitby. Metrolinx Durham Region and our project team have heard the Whitby community clearly and have further refined the preliminary design to maintain two-way traffic through the downtown core, and we're excited to share the latest preliminary designs with you. It is my pleasure to be your moderator for this evening's event. Metrolinx is committed to engaging with and informing our neighbors, customers, and the community about our progress as we move forward with planning, building, and operating the region's transit network. We invite all feedback regarding our services and our projects, and I want to thank you again for your interest in joining us this evening. Please note that this event is being closed captioned. To use this feature, please enable it on your video player. As we begin, I'd like to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. Metrolinx wishes to recognize that it operates on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. In particular, we acknowledge that the Durham Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit project traverses both the Treaty 13 territories with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations and the William Treaty's territory, specifically the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on these lands and has a responsibility to work with the original keepers of this territory and the many diverse Indigenous peoples living here today. Metrolinx remains committed to engaging with Indigenous people and nations on the Durham Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit project. I would also like to take a moment to talk about safety. Safety is our first priority at Metrolinx, and we often begin our meetings with a safety moment. I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you a reminder. In Ontario, as we continue living through this difficult lockdown, it's important for everyone to exercise patience and understanding for each other and above all, whether we are vaccinated or not, that we remain safe. For those who are interested, earlier this week, the province did expand eligibility for vaccinations to those over the age of 18. Before we begin, I would now like to talk about the format and expectations for today. We've listened to your feedback from our previous virtual town halls that many of you have felt that we did not have a proper channel to speak. We understand that you like a more direct form of communication, and so we want to ensure that we've heard you, and we're hoping to bridge that gap with this new format. At the same time, some others like the anonymity of the previous format. So we will be doing a hybrid format where we will have the first 30 minutes where we're taking questions typed via the Engage Live page, as we did in our previous town hall. From there, my colleague Jackie will be taking the lead in terms of moderating our Zoom room. In that session of our meeting, we'll be giving the opportunity to the community members to ask their questions live via Zoom. In the meantime, following our presentation, you will see that you can type in a question into the chat function on the side of your screen, which also allows other participants to vote for your question. We have scheduled the session to last 90 minutes, and we will begin with a brief presentation, and then we'll take as many questions as possible. Similar to our previous meetings, we often see a lot of repetition in questions. In an effort to answer as many different questions as possible and to avoid reading and answering duplicate questions, I ask that you scroll through the existing questions, and if you see ones that cover your areas of interest, please vote it up. We will be answering questions based on popularity of votes. Should you have another question or require clarity, or if there wasn't enough time to get to your question, we will endeavor to provide you written responses via Metrolinx Engage site, as we've done in previous meetings. Additionally, there may be some questions that we cannot answer today. These questions include specific issues, service-related items, or those topics of a confidential nature. Lastly, please be mindful that conduct inconsistent with our policies will result in the removal of comments and questions. We encourage all attendees to be respectful and to keep the conversation relevant to the Durham Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit project and the preliminary designs for Whitby. Again, if you've just joined us, our event is being closed captioned, and to use this feature, simply enable it on your video player. Our goal is to continue this partnership with the community to find a balance of benefits for both residents of the town of Whitby as well as Durham region. We are committed to continuing the conversation about the Durham Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit, and will establish community liaison committees towards the end of 2021 or early 2022. These committees will allow for and will foster consistent dialogue between local stakeholders, including resident associations, businesses, and other institutions such as schools and hospitals, on the work to be completed post-environmental assessment and into the detailed design and construction stages. I would now like to introduce our wonderful panel for this evening. With us tonight, we have Matu Getsky, who is our Vice President for Planning from Metrolinx. We have Rajesh Ketrapal, who is our Vice President for Community Engagement from Metrolinx. We have David Dunn, who's the Manager for the Rapid Transit Office from Durham Region. We have William Holmes, who is the General Manager for Durham Regional Transit. And we have David Hopper, our Lead Consultant from Parsons and IBI Group. With that, I'll pass it to Matu to provide an overview of the Durham Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit Project.
Thank you, Teresa, for this introduction. Thank you all for your time this evening. We're happy to have the opportunity to continue our outreach and present how the work is advancing on this important project for the region. So maybe for next slide. So just a quick reminder, so that this is one of 3 large BRT projects that are in the 2041 Regional Transportation Plan. It's a 36-kilometer corridor that is really destined to go through the urban growth centers that are all along Durham region and go directly into the eastern part of Toronto to Scarborough and all the amenities that are there. So it doesn't have the same function as the rail line. Part of it runs parallel, but it really hits a lot of different destinations and will support different types of customers along the way. Next slide, please. So in 2018, we had published what we call an initial business case, which is the first evaluation of what that project can deliver in terms of benefits for the region. So we saw that in terms of economic benefits for the region, so that are calculated in terms of how much time people save, how much benefits are for the businesses that are along the way, for the economy as a whole. This project delivers almost $700 million of economic benefits, and mostly in Durham region. That yields what we call a benefit cost ratio. So the cost being approximately around $500 million for that entire corridor. The economic benefits that are generated outweigh the costs, and so so that's what also has driven the decision to continue this project forward, because it does adequately support the growth of the region. Other benefits that we're looking into that are important for this project and that are evaluated are, first, the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced. So we expect that this project will will give more choices for people to move around the region, and will enable car users to better use transit because it will be more convenient for them. And that will save over 160 kilotons of CO2. It will save time for each rider, so 9.5 minutes per rider on average. And then a reduction, and that's very important, the reduction in average bus delay, so the reliability of the service will also be radically improved because of that constant flow of buses that will be enabled. They won't be bunching up, they won't be stuck in traffic, and that's a very important benefit that can save also about 10 to 15 minutes time for each rider. And then the fourth benefit that we're really looking at carefully is the safety benefit. So in the design, we've paid specific attention to road safety and road safety conditions to make sure that we're reducing the possibilities of traffic accidents, injuries, and deaths, and that's also monetized in the business case. On the next slide, please. Just to go back to why, that's a question we've heard from the community, is why on Dundas Street and why not Rossland or Taunton? So what we see is that both the existing urban growth centers where today a lot of the more dense development applications are happening that's along Highway 2 and along Dundas Street, and that's also the way that the land use documents are organized. So the growth plan that projects the growth in the different communities to 2041, and that's what's represented on this map. So the darker it is, the higher the density in 2041. So you see that all the darker, or most of the darker green spots are really aligned across that Highway 2. and there's also a very large number of amenities and equipments and destinations that are along the way, and that you will usually appeal to transit riders. That can be universities, Trent University, U of T Scarborough, hospitals in the Scarborough area, libraries across Durham region, big commercial area around Pickering. So a lot of key drivers there of ridership that we want to serve directly without having people, customers transfer and then kind of waste time along their way. Next slide, please. And this is also supported by current ridership trends, and maybe I'll hand it over to David or Bill to tell you what's already happening today on that corridor.
Thank you, Mathieu. So the image on the left side shows a representation of transit ridership numbers on the key transit routes in Durham based on the thickness of the line that you can see. So while routes like Roslyn and Taunton have considerable ridership and they do have planned future higher order transit routes, the busiest route in the region is on Highway 2, which in 2019 had over 3 million riders. The graph on the right side shows projected ridership increases. And as you can see from the first 4 rows, which represents the Highway 2 corridor, there is significant increases in projected ridership along this corridor in the next 10 years. In fact, the majority of the ridership growth in the region is concentrated along the Highway 2 and Simcoe Street corridors versus the Roslyn and Taunton corridors, which make up the last 2 rows. And these ridership levels are in line with the density map that Mathieu talked about previously. Next slide, please, and I will pass it off to David Hopper.
I'll take you back maybe I thought I was doing the project timeline, so I'll take it back. So in terms of the overall project timeline, so we're there. What you see, the green circles on that slide show the different stages of engagement. So a project has it's a journey that we do together with the municipalities, with elected officials, with MPPs, with staff, and with communities, with stakeholders. And so we advanced through that journey. So it started in 2019 with a public engagement on the objectives, the overall objectives of the of this project. Then it continued at the end of 2019 with a presentation of a first set of preferred designs. And then this is where we are right now after having presented a second set of designs in November of 2020, and now continuing with a consultation. And this is leading to an environmental assessment, and then there will be further public engagement on the specific environmental impacts that are also important. That includes noise and vibration, for example. I saw there's a couple of questions on the Slido board that will be addressing that. So the environmental assessment also looks at a whole other set of impacts that the project might have that are important for residents and neighbors. And then I would say beyond that, once we move into 2022 and into first the preliminary design and then detailed design, that will be the opportunity to continue the consultation on detailed, very specific issues along the itinerary to respond to the community's aspirations. So. And then maybe the next slide, I'll hand it over to Raj to talk in a little bit more detail about consultation to date and how it's expanded throughout that journey as we build the project.
Great, thank you, Mathieu, and good evening, everybody. So as Mathieu mentioned, consultation has been ongoing since 2019 and has included 3 public information centers. We've hosted public virtual open houses, much like we're hosting this evening. We've hosted meetings with stakeholder and community groups and associations, and of course had council presentations. We've also been actively engaged with elected officials along the entire corridor. Specifically, Whitby MPP Lauren Coe has been briefed on the status of the plan and consultations to date. His concerns have been on the impact of area residents and businesses, and he has encouraged us to do deep consultations with the community and council, which we're doing. And we've also presented at several council meetings in the past, and we will continue to meet with the community, business, and elected officials going forward, as Mathieu had already mentioned. We go to the next slide, please.
Great. So it's thank you, Raj, and good evening, everyone, and welcome. So I just want, before we dive into things a little bit further, I just wanted to show you the sort of the overall plan for the town of Whitby. We're looking at dividing it into 6 zones. So starting at the west end at Lake Ridge Road, from there as far as around Raglan Street, we're proposing to widen the road from 4 lanes to 6 lanes to provide dedicated BRT in the middle. In Zone 1B, between Raglan and Cochrane, we would have 2 eastbound traffic lanes, 2 BRT lanes, and 1 westbound traffic lane, which we've optimized to match the traffic volumes. In Zone 2, we will keep the existing 4 lanes, but convert the center 2 lanes to BRT. In Zone 3 will be the 3-lane option that we'll be talking about in more detail in a few minutes. And then we see a mirror pattern in the east part of town, where between Brock Street and Garden Street, the 4 lanes would be repurposed with BRT lanes in the middle and a single lane in each direction on the curb. And then east of Garden Street, widening the road from 4 lanes to 6 lanes with BRT running in the middle. The reason the road changes is because the downtown has a much narrower road, and like the other pinch points, we're looking for unique solutions that match each neighborhood. As we get out of downtown, we see a higher volume of traffic that needs to be handled, which is why we're recommending more traffic lanes towards the east and west ends of town. This also matches what's happening both in Ajax, Pickering, and Oshawa. Give the next slide, please. So we did look at the number of pinch points along the corridor, and each one is slightly different. But before we get into that, we created these evaluation themes that are used to analyze our options. So is this compatible with adjacent communities? Will it protect historical, cultural, and archaeological resources? Does it help protect or improve the natural environment? Does it help increase ridership? Is it sustainable? Does it connect what we want to connect to? And lastly, does it provide a wise public investment? So in 2018, we started with 4 options. We looked at 4 lanes where we would have transit priority. So we would move the parking away, try and optimize the traffic lights to keep the buses moving. The second option was HOV, where the curb lanes would be limited to cars with 3 or more people in them, along with buses. The curbside BRT option, which originally was our preferred concept, where the 2 curb lanes would be converted to bus only. And the last option was median BRT. And the challenge there was actually providing the stop at the corner of Brock and Dundas because of the width of the road. So the 2 options that maintained 4 live lanes of traffic were screened out because they really did not meet the objectives of being compatible with the adjacent community. They bring the traffic too close to the curbside. That doesn't allow any opportunity to make the city more pedestrian oriented. So in 2019, we still came forward with the curbside option. It was felt to be technically the best compromise in the balance between business access, public access, traffic, and transit. We did hear from staff through the staff report and through council that really was not meeting the objectives of the town. The town has plans to see a much more pedestrianized downtown and looking for ways to improve that realm, and felt that 4 lanes did not do that. There was also a concern in the outer parts of town that the 6 lanes was also not acceptable. So part of that report also asked that staff and the Metrolinx team, including the Parsons IBI team, have a workshop on how to fine-tune the design and closer align the project with the objectives of the town. Out of that came the transit mall concept, and the idea here was to provide 2 lanes through the downtown, but would be for buses only. That would allow for sidewalks to be twice as wide on both the north and the south side of the street, but would push the through traffic onto local side streets. We've done some detailed analysis using anonymized cell phone data over a whole 1-year period from 2019 to look at travel patterns, and felt that would be manageable, although that does put a lot of pressure on some of the local roads. We did hear some very strong feedback that from a business perspective, that doesn't allow for direct access to and view of the buildings. It doesn't provide a through route for trucks and other large vehicles. And it also creates a lot of neighborhood infiltration. So we went back and looked at fine tuning that and came to the north side pedestrian mall option, where in effect we would have a 3-lane cross section. So we would have 1 through lane of traffic eastbound, 1 BRT lane eastbound, and 1 bus lane westbound. The reason we chose the eastbound lane is not only the configuration of the road and the intersection at Brock and Dundas, but also the afternoon traffic eastbound is substantially higher than westbound traffic in the morning. This resulted in a short detour of westbound traffic up Brock, across Marion, down Byron, which we felt was a more reasonable balance. But there has still been some concern with that, so we've now moved forward with the option we're presenting tonight. Could the next slide, please? So the curbside option, it did accommodate transit. It did avoid impacting the buildings. It did have minimal impact on cultural heritage, but there was concern about pedestrians, public realm, concern about impacts to the local neighborhood, to the library and Celebration Square in front of it, as well as the loss of on-street parking. Town staff asked us to look at high occupancy vehicles again, to look at a lane reversal system where we would have 2 lanes in the peak direction and 1 lane in the off-peak direction. And the outcome of the staff report, as I mentioned, was for us to discuss those alternatives. Can I see the next slide, please? So here again, we see about the transit mall. So here we see a much improved public realm, a greater emphasis on transit. We felt there was a reasonable impact of traffic infiltration on the neighborhood, given the patterns that we're seeing, that 80% of the traffic on Dundas is local traffic within the town that could find a portion of their route on alternate streets, which they're already using. And we also found a replacement for the parking at a new lot or an expanded lot at Byron and Elm. What we heard, though, was that was still sacrificing too much of the community for transit priority. There was too much traffic infiltration and business impacts, as well as the opportunities that were being created were not balanced against the neighborhood concerns. Go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this led to the Northside Pedestrian Mall, and the idea here was to try and balance things off and provide some benefit by widening the sidewalk on the north side, would allow improved accessibility to those businesses to ramp up for the one step at the door. There was still some concern about traffic infiltration, but it was still greatly reduced from what we saw before. There was still a concern about westbound for trucks and school buses going through, as well as trying to balance the width of the sidewalk on both the north and the south side of the street. So from that, we've refined the option again. If we go to the next slide, please. And here is the option that we believe now is the appropriate balance of all of the needs in the community. And this we're calling the 3-lane option. So what we see on the plan here is in the eastbound direction, we have a dedicated traffic lane in gray on the bottom all the way through. We have an eastbound BRT lane, which would come through and serve a stop shown in blue on the east side of the intersection for the eastbound passengers, who would then cross to and from that via the crosswalk at the signal. In the westbound direction, as far west as Perry, we would have the traffic operating in its own lane on the curb and the buses operating in their own lane in the middle of the road. West of Perry Street, the cars would merge into a shared lane. We would also maintain the right-hand turn from westbound Dundas to northbound Brock because it's a fairly heavy move. The mixed lane of traffic and buses would go through the intersection. Buses would stop at the Blue Island stop or the sidewalk stop on the far side. And then once getting past Byron Street, cars would transition to the curb lane and buses would move into their own lane. So we would be shared for about 150 to 180 meters through here, and we would be able to balance all of the concerns. It would allow for trucks and buses to go straight through. We can see the parking lot at Byron and Elm to replace the on-street parking. Can I have the next slide, please? So this option has a lot of benefits. It does improve by allowing some widening of the sidewalks. We're still looking at how we can balance that between south and north. It does maintain good transit reliability because we only mix with traffic for a very short distance. We do have the continuous eastbound and westbound general traffic lane, so trucks and buses, as well as most of the traffic, can keep moving through. This significantly reduces the amount of neighborhood infiltration. It will improve the access to businesses and pedestrians for the downtown core. It provides more opportunities for streetscaping and enhanced public realm. It has no impact on the heritage character of downtown. So if we go to the next question, the next slide, please. What we have heard about this is that the idea of moving the 31 parking spaces to Byron and Elm is a good solution, as particularly if we add a crosswalk at Byron so that those people can get to and from the south side of the street. The eastbound traffic is a fairly good solution. It allows for one through lane all the way across. Having the mixed lane westbound solves a lot of the problems, particularly for trucks and heavy vehicles. There is still some concern about where the stop is on the west side, and we agree that there could be some fine tuning. Ideally, we want it close to Brock to allow for transfers to the north-south bus route, which serves the GO station. If it goes a little bit further west, that might allow more cars to follow the bus through the intersection as the light turns red and not block the intersection. We've also looked at moving it to the east side in front of the bank. The challenge there is if we do that, we cannot have the right turn lane as well as the through lane, and that would mean more traffic that is turning north on Brock Street would choose Hickory, Ash, or Perry to work their way through the neighborhood in lieu of staying on Dundas and Brock. So there's still some work to be done in fine-tuning this, but we believe this is a good balance in terms of public realm, business access, transit priority, minimizing traffic infiltration, and serving the entire community. Could I see the next slide, please? So yes, in terms of public response, could we move the stop further west? Could we replace it with a bus bay? The challenge with a bus bay is that if the bus pulls out of the lane to serve the bay, it has trouble getting back in. And one of the things we're trying to do here is minimize those kinds of delays. That is a significant delay along any bus route is using bus bays. Trying to balance the width of sidewalk on the north and the south side. We are trying to see if there's a way to fine tune that. The challenge is matching up the lanes on both the north side of the road and the south side of the road, but we can look at that in more detail. As I mentioned, relocating that stop to the east side of Brock, which we think has some issues in terms of driving traffic up Perry Street, where there is a daycare center, as well as driving through the local neighborhood. And so we're interested in some of your thoughts on these considerations and how we might fine tune this design. Can I have the next slide, please? In the first staff report, and in fact the second staff report from the town as well, we were asked to look at a couple of other options, some of which we'd already looked at before and have gone back to. One is a mixed traffic operation where we would simply have a single lane eastbound and a single lane westbound with buses and cars mixing. The challenge there is as we introduce more mixing, we have lower priority and more opportunities for the buses to get jammed up and losing the reliability that are the cornerstone to this project being a success. The other option is what's called a flexible boulevard, where in some periods of time, the boulevard is for the public, for pedestrians, and sometimes it's for vehicles. The challenge here is that's not really compatible with frequent rapid transit. It does improve the public realm, and it has been shown to reduce vehicle speeds. It does create some distinctive downtown places. But there are challenges with the reduced traffic capacity that comes with that, which we believe will lead to some neighborhood traffic infiltration. As well, the pedestrian realm is generally not physically separated from traffic, which requires drivers to pay more attention, and we're not sure that on a road like Highway 2 or Dundas that's the appropriate mix. The next slide, please. We also looked at the 4-lane curbside, as I mentioned. The challenge here is having the buses right against the narrow sidewalks and losing some business front access. We did look at the 2-lane mixed operation, as I mentioned, with the 2 mixed lanes, but again, we lose a lot of the transit priority, particularly if this becomes longer than 1 or 2 blocks, as well as the friction for mixing buses and cars together and then separating them out. Go to the next slide, please. We also looked at some more hybrid solutions. So one was a lane reversal system where we could have had 2 lanes westbound in the morning and 1 lane eastbound, and then the reverse in the evening with 2 eastbound and 1 westbound. The challenge here is telling drivers and everyone using the road which lane is for which purpose. So the purpose of the lanes changes during the course of the day. You see that sometimes on bridge approaches, or the only local example is actually on Jarvis Street in downtown Toronto. The challenge, as you can see from the upper right photo, is the overhead signage that's needed to make that kind of system work safely becomes very visually intrusive, and we didn't feel that work in the heritage character of the downtown. The other option was, could we have a single reversible BRT lane in the center, as in the lower picture in Eugene, Oregon? The challenge here was providing the stop at Brock Street, because at Brock Street we need places for people to board and alight from the buses, and if an eastbound bus is handling passengers, a westbound bus can't get through. So when we start to see more frequent service by 2041, the single lane option really does not provide the capacity and the reliability that we need. As well, there is some possibility of driver confusion, because sometimes the bus is coming along beside you and sometimes it's approaching from the other direction. It's also challenging for passengers to know where to wait for their bus. The next slide, please. So just to recap, so the solution in the west end in zone 1A is to widen from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. So we would have dedicated BRT lanes in the middle with a solid median down the road. So all left turns across the street into driveways and side streets would be restricted to U-turns at signalized intersections where you would have a dedicated U-turn phase that's protected without other vehicles moving to turn around and go back. And in 1B, we would narrow down to 1 lane westbound, which we believe can be handled from Cochrane out towards Raglan. In zone 2, we're showing the 4-lane solution with the buses running in the median and cars in the curbside, the 3-lane option in zone 3, and then again in zone 4, 4 lanes with 2 bus lanes and 1 lane of traffic in each direction. And then Garden serves a major distribution purpose on the east side of downtown. So we really see the traffic volumes there warrant having 2 lanes of traffic in each direction. So we're widening to 6 lanes, including replacing the CP rail bridge. When we get to the Oshawa border, the median lanes continue as far as Waverley, where we split to the one-way King and Bond. And at the west end from Lakeridge, we continue with median BRT lanes the entire length of the corridor all the way to Scarborough Town Centre. Have the next slide, please. So just in a little more detail, when we were looking in the West End, we see about 1,400 vehicles per hour, which it can't be handled by 1 lane of traffic. We think, though, that between Cochrane and Raglan, this traffic is a little bit lower, and we believe that because it is partially traffic turning right off of Cochrane and coming westbound on the single lane from Dundas, we can make that work. We need to then widen out before we get to the traffic light at McQuay to be able to make that light function properly. Have the next slide, please. So this is an image of the road today. So we're looking east along Dundas Street at Annis Cochrane, and the next slide will show our rendering of what it could look like in the future. The next slide, please. So we see the 2 red BRT lanes in the middle. We see the far side stops that are served by crosswalks at signalized intersections. We're looking at providing continuous sidewalks along the corridor and wherever possible, continuous cycling facilities. Through the downtown, this will connect to a dedicated bicycling facility provided by the town along Mary Street, because the downtown core is too narrow to support cycling independent of the facility. Can I have the next slide, please? There's also a challenge at Celebration Square at the corner of Euclid and Henry. And the challenge here is that we need to have a stop here to serve both the library and the high school and other activity centers on Henry Street. We also need to maintain the left-hand turns and the U-turns on and off Dundas Street. And in order to do that and provide the bus stops, we have a challenge with a heritage building in the northwest quadrant at 500 Dundas. We have the retail buildings on the northeast quadrant that are right out to the sidewalk. And we have the library set back with the square and the urban filter. So we looked at a number of options here. We looked at 5 different ways to do this. Could we put the bus stop on the east side? Could we take away the left turn lanes? Could we move the stop over to King Street? And what we're really seeing is that the best opportunity here is to move the urban filter back between 3 and 5 meters and allow this design to move forward. It does make the Celebration Square marginally smaller, but we believe that is the best balance of options here. And that's something else we'd like to talk to you about. Can I have the next slide, please? As I mentioned, sections 4 and 5 is the 4-lane option as far as Garden, and then widening out to 6 lanes with the replacement of the CP bridge. Again, it's because we see a lot of traffic turning on and off Garden Street that bumps up the traffic volumes to be larger than what 1 lane can handle. As well, the CP track cuts off a lot of cross streets, and Dundas really is one of the major ways to get in from the east end. Can I have the next slide, please? I promise we're almost at the end. So I'll turn it back to Matthew just to recap the next steps, and then we can open up for questions. Matthew?
Yep, thanks, David. So the next steps are to based on a preferred design, we can prepare the environmental project report, so which will evaluate all the environmental impacts on cultural heritage, on noise, vibration, environmental aspects. We'll provide an update on to Whitby Council and Durham Region Council on all the recent refinements and how they respond to the feedback that we've received from the community. Then in the summer, we will commence the transit project assessment process. So that's the environmental assessment. And there will be a specific dedicated public consultation period on these elements. So that will be focused on these environmental impacts and the mitigations. And then that will enable us to build all these mitigations and finalize what we call a preliminary design business case by the end of the year or early next year, which will recost the entire project, analyze, tally all the benefits, and make the best case for this project to the different funding organizations. After that, so the consultation will continue during the detailed design. So David mentioned a number of refinements that we've thought about as variants of the project that we are committing to review during that stage. So including the platform design, the platform location at Brock and Byron, where we've heard a lot of questions on how do we prevent cars from being stuck behind the buses there, as well as sidewalk width to balance things out between the north and the south. So these are detailed design elements that we're committing to continue consultation with beyond the environmental assessment. And then after that, we'll also be establishing community liaison committees. These will help in particular to prepare construction. So once we start staging the construction pieces, once we start preparing how that construction will be rolled out, there we need to be very, very careful and engage with a number of you to understand the very practical details of how this will be managed throughout the construction stages. And we just repeat a couple of resources, an email resource and the website where your comments are always welcome, and we'll continue to consider them throughout that extensive consultation up to construction.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists for that very detailed presentation. For those who have just joined us, I want to thank you for participating in our Durham Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit public meeting. My name is Teresa Tran and I'm from Metrolinx. This event is being closed captioned, and to use this feature, please enable it on your video player. Our terrific panelists are now taking questions that you can see on the side of your screen. I know that there's been a lot of good ones that's come in, so without further ado, let's get to them. The first two are very similar, and they are interested in terms of the 4-lane mixed traffic alternative through Whitby's downtown and are wondering if this is being considered. Maybe I can direct this to Mathieu to talk about the analysis that we've done on the 4-lane option, and then David Hopper can provide a little bit more detail.
Yep, thank you, Teresa, and thank you for this question. So as David presented, we went to staff and council in 2019 with a 4-lane curbside option, so not mixed traffic, but we looked at that curbside. We had looked previously at HOV lanes with kind of semi-mixed traffic going through the downtown. So these are things that we had considered at the time. And then there were a number of concerns that were related to the size of the pedestrian realm, the safety also in relationship between the traffic going along the curb there and the volume of pedestrians on the sidewalk. So maybe starting to add some protections on the sidewalk, which would decrease the sidewalk size. There's also impacts to the businesses, to deliveries, and some friction related to that that made this option that posed a number of problems with this option. So that's why we reviewed the approach. And today I think we've through the work and through the feedback that we've had from the community, we think that, and we're confident that the 3-lane option, which maintains that through traffic all across the downtown of Whitby, we can provide the benefits in terms of traffic flow, while additional benefits in terms of pedestrianization and still maintaining good transit benefits. I must say also, in the way we look at it, the 3-lane is only between Brock and Byron. So the rest of the downtown area is still on a 4-lane traffic option. So these 3 lanes, that's not a continuous option going all the way through from Garden to Cochrane. It's really limited to that very short segment between Byron and Brock. And already today at Brock Street, there's only one westbound lane going through the intersection there, because the northern lane on Dundas turns right onto Brock. So actually it would be it's just the moment when we widen from that 3-lane segment to 4, that's a little bit different. So we do think now that with that revised design, with a refined design, and there are still a few questions, really good questions we received from the community on how do we make sure that cars aren't stuck behind the bus when it stops between Byron and Brock. And these are things that we're committing to review in detailed design to really find the optimal location of the bus stop, to make sure that that doesn't happen, that it doesn't block the intersection between Brock and Dundas, and so that the traffic flow will be maintained in good conditions. David, did you have anything else on?
Yeah, I just a couple of things to add. So when we think about some of the most successful transit systems in the country, you think about the Montreal Metro, the Vancouver SkyTrain, the subway in Toronto, the GO train, what they benefit from is being completely separated from traffic. And those are very high volume systems, and really the volumes in Durham region along this corridor are not quite that heavy. But if you think about the Calgary SkyTrain, or the LRT in Edmonton, or the Viva system in York region, that's the next tier down, where we're trying to, and even the east end of the Eglinton Crosstown, where what we're trying to do is keep the system at surface, where it's much more cost effective to build for the volume of people, but keeping it as separated from cars as possible so that we can maintain the reliability of the system. Wherever we mix, other than at traffic intersections, we chew into the reliability of the system. And what the benefits that come out of this system are not only the consistent speed along the corridor, but also the reliability, that the bus is going to be there every 5 minutes, plus or minus a few seconds, so that people don't need to plan their time. They can just go out and know that there's going to be a bus every 5 minutes. So when we started looking at the length of downtown, like when originally the thought was Garden to Cochrane, even it's a little bit shorter, you already see along Dundas Street, if there's an incident on the 401 or if it's a snowy day, the traffic in that area can jam up pretty quickly. So we would lose the reliability of benefit, but not just through downtown Whitby, but for that bus for the entire rest of its journey all the way into Scarborough. So what we've tried to do is create enough priority for the buses to make sure we can reliably maintain the schedule to increase ridership. And increased ridership is not just an objective for Metrolinx, it also is a way to reduce pressure on the roads as more and more people move into Durham, move into Whitby, move into Oshawa, and take jobs here. So the idea is to provide that priority to move more people more effectively through the corridor and take pressure off the rest of the road network as the region continues to mature. And being the fastest growing region in the Greater Toronto Area for the last decade and plan to be for the next 10 to 20 years, we really need to look at moving more people more efficiently. And so that's why we have moved away from an option that mixes cars and traffic to the degree possible, except for this sort of 2 blocks between Perry and Byron.
Thank you, Matthew and David, for that. So we do have a third question, and it is in relation to the 4-lane option, and I know that you've addressed it, but the question also asks why is it not the same as what it is through Pickering Village? So maybe, Matthew, if I can ask you to elaborate a little bit more in regards to what the rest of the corridor looks like for the BRT project.
Yeah, so throughout the rest of the project, we really try to right size the size of the street and the highway to the volume of traffic that's there. So in Pickering Village, we had extensive discussions on how wide can we make it. Initially, we had come with a 6-lane option through Pickering, so wider to accommodate much heavier traffic loads that are there, because as we move further west, the traffic continues to build. So we see it both on the buses, where the ridership is more and more intense as we move towards the west of the region, because they pick up all the people from Durham who are going towards Toronto, and because there is also increasing density in these areas. So the whole project really customizes the width of the highway with respect to the traffic data. So in Pickering Village, that's what we tried. We landed on, I think it's a 5-lane option, specifically in that intersection, to mitigate also the impacts on heritage buildings there. And they had similar concerns to downtown Whitby on not making it too wide to maintain some of the character of the environment there. And so we landed on a 5-lane option to maintain some turn lanes also at the intersection, I think, with Church Street and along Highway 2. And so in a way it's quite the reason why we do that is because the traffic volumes are much bigger there. And then as we move east, we see towards Oshawa, it's really, there's no explicit widening in Oshawa. We're reusing some of the parking lanes to be able to have the dedicated bus lane. So again, we're customizing it with respect to the volume of traffic. And David, yeah, I don't know if I don't have the data right under my eyes like this, but we can provided that.
So there's one other technical thing in Pickering Village that's slightly different than Whitby, and that is that the west end of Pickering Village is right at the cemetery and the creek. And so we don't have the opportunity for traffic to divert off of Dundas Street to go down into the local neighborhood before they get to Church Street. So unlike Whitby, where you can turn down Jeffrey, you can turn down Cochrane, you can turn down all the little side streets, you don't have that option in Pickering Village because of the physical location, the physical layout of the village. So that's why we felt we had to keep the 2 eastbound lanes there, but we are reducing to 1 lane westbound in order to keep the BRT priority.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew and David. So our next question is a bit of a comment and also a question. So some council members aren't hearing residents. They want to know if Metrolinx can find a way to directly engage with residents of the affected areas through a neutral online survey. Matthew, maybe if I can ask you to talk to how we've been engaging with the residents and incorporating the feedback that we've heard to date.
Yeah, so I think engagement is, and then we had a slide earlier to speak to the different forms of engagement. So there are a number of ways that we collect information, feedback, and data from the different communities. So first, we do conduct large-scale surveys. So all of the ridership modeling, for example, that we talked about. So how many people we expect to take the bus in the future because they'll save time over driving. These are based on extensive surveys on where people are coming from and where they're going, and then the growth patterns that where new buildings are being built, new homes are being built, new jobs are being created. So that's all based on very detailed survey information that really tells us where people are coming from and where they want to go. Other surveys that we use on a regular basis are so there, the traffic analysis that David Hopper mentioned earlier is based on anonymized cell phone data survey. So again, understanding in detail what are the traffic patterns of people going through Whitby. So that was an exercise that was done to collect all of that information. Then we also have a stakeholder advisory group that was involved throughout all the different stages of design to make sure that some key stakeholders along the entire 36-kilometer corridor are informed and can provide feedback continuously throughout the process. And then we just kind of gradually widen that engagement to different other kind of stakeholders, other members of the community, customers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good, I mean, we need all these different types of inputs because we know that a survey is only as good as the quality of the question it's asking. There you saw in the presentation tonight, we've already looked at 3 kind of core families of solutions, a number of little variations on that. So that requires the type of deliberation exchange that we can only have through a meeting. I wish we could have it face to face. Unfortunately, here with given the current pandemic, we're not able to do that. But so you only see our faces behind our little computer screens. But that's a form of dialogue that I think provides a much much richer type of feedback than the survey that will where a question has to oversimplify the question. So I think we're also really interested in listening to a diversity of voices in the communities. There's a lot of different, and there you saw in the benefits, we're looking at benefits for a lot of different types of people and users. We're looking at benefits for residents, for businesses, for transit users, for cyclists. So we're looking at a lot of different families, and so we need to be able to communicate with all of them in parallel to understand their specific needs in order to really fine tune the solution and get the right balance of benefits that we're trying to get with this solution.
Thank you,
Maybe
Matthew.
I'll just top up there if I can. And Matthew, great points there. And just want to stress that what we've heard from the community so far, is being reflected in the refinements to the design. And it's really important for us to hear from you and hear what you have to say. While tonight is a larger scale format, we were very much interested in meeting with smaller groups, one-to-one conversations. As we mentioned, we do have a community engagement team that is on the ground, ready and available. So please contact us via email, via phone, follow us, and we're happy to have those direct one-to-one conversations with you and to capture your feedback. And everything that we capture is actually being recorded, and it will be part of the public record as part of the environmental project report. So just encouraging everyone to reach out as we continue to reach out, and we're happy to have that further dialogue.
Thank you, Raj. So our next question is in regards to working from home and being the future norm. So with COVID impacting how many organizations will work in the future, working from home being the new norm, will updated needs assessment be completed? Matthew, I want to pass this one to you.
Yep, thank you for this question. It's true that we're all in the transit world, but a lot of different economic sectors are wondering what the pandemic holds for them. So we know today we see the ridership levels are much lower than pre-pandemic. They're still 60% below. So depending on the operator, so I won't speak for Bill here across Durham, but they're depending on the operator and the specific needs. We know they're having an impact. Today, we've been surveying. We've been actually sending detailed surveys on people's expectations on how they want to return to work, what their firm's behavior are throughout the entire Greater Golden Horseshoe to understand that, and that will be encapsulated in what we call a sensitivity in the business case that we will publish in early next year. So we will look at that. Our gut feeling right now, from a qualitative point of view, is that we see that telework is. It already picked up much more in, I would say, white-collar downtown Toronto workers that are usually served more by the rail service than by this type of bus service, which serves a much broader range of customers. So we actually expect that the impact on a line like this one that doesn't specifically target the downtown employment area will resist much more. Will have much better ridership than the ridership gap or the ridership drop will be much dampened compared to what we might expect for downtown core, where there may be some more significant changes in the financial, insurance sectors or communication sectors that are concentrated in there. So we'll have the updated needs assessment and the business case coming up next year, but our early results really tell us that the type of riders that we might get on this BRT will be less affected than those that are going into the downtown core on other systems.
And it's Bill here, and I'll just complement what Matthew had to say, and just indicate that we even through the pandemic, we've seen those trends. We all know that the community downtown Toronto, that's not there right now, but we do expect some of that's going to come back. But even right now, we're seeing those residents who are traveling to those the healthcare facilities and traveling to the various manufacturing locations. They continue to rely on that key east, west, and north, south bus service to get to where they need to go. And that's only going to increase as we move along and everyone starts to travel again. So it's really critical that we maintain that pulse, the spine of our network, so that we can get those workers to our healthcare facilities, to our manufacturing, and also to our educational facilities across the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill and Matthew. As a quick
Maybe just one more word, because there's also quite a few hospitals there. So we know that they're both essential services. So today there are a lot of people that are riding there, and they will continue post-pandemic. So there's a lot of really key destinations there that where telework won't apply, and they were on one of the early slides that we presented. So these are also important riders for us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. Just as a reminder to those who are participating tonight, we are taking questions based on popularity. So we'd encourage you to go through the set of questions and vote up the ones that you want answered. And in an effort to answer as many different types of questions as possible, we are going to try to avoid answering duplicate questions. Maybe with that, I will go to the next question. In terms of traffic infiltration, it's asking, how does diverting 40% of westbound traffic into downtown neighborhood fit the council objective of traffic calming? Maybe I can pass this one to Mathieu, and David can top up with some of the analysis on traffic infiltration.
Yep. I can start just kind of top lining the numbers. We're not expecting 40% of westbound traffic to divert to the downtown neighborhoods. And the traffic analysis that was done, I think the number was closer to 5 or 6%. So out of the 800 cars that are going west in the rush hour, and that's forecasted in 2041. So we're always really trying to protect for a 10-20 year horizon. Out of these 800 cars, only 60 would use the local streets such as Murray or Dunlap because they get to their destination more quickly. So it's more of a 5% ratio than the 40%, which I don't know exactly where it's coming from. But David, maybe you can tell us a little bit more. I know you have the numbers.
Yeah, so Matthew, it is a total of 40%, but it is not everyone is going to continue to come westbound on Dundas and then turn up and go across Mary. So we know that some people who are making longer trips are going to know quite soon that when this project is implemented. And if you're coming from the east side of Oshawa or even further out, you're more likely to divert onto Taunton or onto Highway 401. If you're coming a little bit closer and your destination is somewhere in North Whitby, maybe you'll turn up Garden and go across somewhere else. Or if you're coming out of Northeast Whitby trying to go west, maybe you'll go across Bonaccord and come down Des Newman rather than coming today down Garden or Hickory and turning across Dundas. So we will see patterns that change both locally immediately off, which, as Matthew said, is like a 5 to 7%. There's some other streets like Burns and Bonaccord, which we'll see about the same amount. And then we see a fair amount of traffic going to the next arterials to Rossland and Taunton and Highway 401. So the other thing we see is that if we do not improve public transit and we don't create a reliable system that more people will choose to take public transit, we're going to see traffic growth that is even higher. And what we're seeing in terms of background traffic without BRT and with BRT is we're seeing a very, very similar amount of traffic moving onto some of the local streets in downtown. So all of the streets will get busier in the future. That's a given that we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people move into the region over the next 20 years and 50 or 60,000 jobs. What we're trying to do is create more capacity on the corridor, carrying more people by transit so that we actually get a more efficient use of the roadway and take pressure off traffic growth. So Teresa?
Perfect. Thank you. So the next question is more of a comment, and maybe I can pass this one back to you, David. The comment is, I want to see all the research that's done regarding the counts on cars going through the core from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and the number that will be diverted by hour. So maybe you speak to a little bit more of the traffic data that we can share with the audience.
Sure. So we had the typical traffic counts that are done by the local municipality, but when we got into here, we realized it was a little more complex. So we've gone to a company called Streetlight, and what they have supplied to us is anonymized cell phone data over a 12-month period. So we've got 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, Monday to Thursday for an entire year. What I mean by anonymous cell phone data is that it shows us an accumulation of trips. So we can ask it, how many people are traveling westbound on Brock between or westbound on Dundas between Bach and Byron, and where do they come from? And it will show us a network of all of the routes that they used. What it will not allow us to do is actually go all the way back to an identifiable house or pick one car out of it to be able to track through. What we start to see, though, when we use this data, we put it into our traffic models, and we start to see where cars move and what choices people are making based on the total economic decision that they make every time you get in your car, right? So we know that some people prefer to stay on the main road, even if it's not moving. Some people prefer to drive by always keeping moving. Some people are willing to go way out of their way to avoid traffic disruptions. Others are much more restricted because of where they're going and how they need to get there. So all those kinds of behaviors are amalgamated together. And so the traffic reports will talk to all of that information and what we found and what the patterns are and how we've applied that to the different options.
Thank you, David. So I know that there are a lot of participants in our Zoom room as well who have been waiting patiently. So with that, I'm going to now throw it over to Jackie, who will connect us with the folks ready to ask the live questions via Zoom. Again, we know that we do have a lot of questions still within the chat function, and if we don't get through them today, we will endeavor to answer them via our Metrolinx Engage site. So maybe with that, I'll pass it over to Jackie.
Thank you, Teresa. So I'd like to take this opportunity just to welcome everybody to the Zoom room. We've created this Zoom room in an attempt to bridge the digital gap and to ensure we have a more direct form of communication with our communities. So for those just joining us, in this section of our virtual open house, we'll be giving an opportunity to community members to ask their questions live via Zoom. And for those wanting to ask their questions on Zoom, please click on the yellow button titled Join Zoom on Metrolinx Engage for tonight's meeting, and you'll be redirected to the Zoom room if you're not already here. Having said that, we'll be answering questions in the order of hands raised. And just as a quick reminder, please try to keep your questions clear and concise so we can get to as many people as possible. With that, we'll go to our first question coming from Jenny. Jenny, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening. As a resident of downtown Whitby myself, up until about a month ago, I had not heard of the Metrolinx project, even though there's information leading back to pre-2019 regarding this. Up until 2 weeks ago, I did not receive anything in my mailbox regarding this. And as a community member, I've been out in the last couple of days talking to folks about the project, and a lot of people are talking about the 4-lane option that was first introduced previously. And what we want to know is, why is it that as a community, we're asking for this option back and it's not being supported by both council locally or by Metrolinx? And is there any physical impediment to 4 lanes at the 4 corners? Because right now we actually have enough space to have 4 lanes. We have it right now. And with that, has there been any consideration given to a 4-lane option with historically appropriate pedestrian barriers downtown?
Thank you, Jenny. Panelists, over to you.
Would you like me to start, Matthew? Okay, so we did look quite carefully at 4-lane options. As I mentioned at the beginning, we looked, in fact, the first 4 options that we created back in 2018 were all 4-lane options. So we looked at a 4-lane mixed traffic option, and that created too much congestion and too many problems with the reliability for the buses. So it was screened out as not being compatible with the objective of improving transit to try and control the rate of traffic growth. We looked at an HOV option where the curb lanes would be buses and cars with 3+ people in it. Again, there's not enough 3+ cars to go into that lane to take the pressure off the other lane. And again, we see the same problem with the friction with the buses on the right-hand lane with right-hand turns at driveways and left turning traffic across it. So we didn't get the degree of priority that we need to make this project successful. So we looked at, could we dedicate the curb lanes to buses only? And so that option was the one that was technically preferred. But before I get to that, we looked at the option of could we run median BRT and leave the 2 curb lanes open. The challenge with the median option is there's nowhere to place the stop at the corner of Brock and Byron in order to make that work. We would need to have, in effect, 5 lanes because you need an eastbound car lane, an eastbound bus lane, a westbound bus lane, a westbound bus stop, and a westbound car lane. So there is not enough room in the intersection to run median transit. So to go to the side, again, we would then be placing the stops in very limited, narrow sidewalks. We would not influence somewhere east of downtown, mix traffic to get to the outside lane, and then move back in. And so all of those friction points along the corridor reduce the reliability and also don't provide any of the benefits the town would like to see in their master planning in terms of making the downtown more pedestrian friendly and providing a greater public realm. So that's what we heard early on through Whitby staff and through Whitby Council, was that the option of 4 live lanes, whether it's buses only in the curb or whether it's 4 mixed lanes of traffic, is not compatible with council's long-term vision for downtown. And so that's why we moved to some of these other options. And now we're trying to find the sweet spot between providing transit priority, balancing the needs of traffic, and reducing the amount of neighborhood infiltration. And that's where we've come to the 3-lane option, which keeps through traffic in a single lane, east and westbound. It does allow for trucks and heavy vehicles to move through without diverting. It controls the amount of neighborhood infiltration. And as I mentioned, provides good transit priority. So as we move through this and listening to the community and listening to the groups that we've been talking to, we believe that this is a good balance of all of the priorities that we're trying to achieve for this entire corridor, but primarily focused on this particular section.
And again, maybe to add one word to that, I think there's a couple of, we've heard from the community some concerns on having the cars being stuck behind the buses at that westbound stop between Brock and Byron. So that's a piece that we completely understand. So that's a specific kind of design detail that we're committing to look at again to see if how we can manage that to make sure that we don't have cars blocking and possibly blocking the intersection between Brock and Dundas and then generating the type of congestion that would generate more traffic diversion.
Jenny, I understand you have a follow-up question, so let's keep it just to one question, but I'll allow this follow-up question this go around.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I was just wanting to follow up in particular as to the community now is only finding out about the project and it's being more widely talked about. And I understand specifically when it comes to the 4 corners in Whitby, this is where the concern is that we have a solution now. Why is it that we have to reduce the traffic flow in the area when it's working currently? Using the right-hand and left-hand lanes for buses would work. We do have it flowing through the 4 corners right now. Why is it that we can't consider that again, even though the community is really asking for it? It seems that nobody wants to address the situation, and we are making the request.
So I think we're trying to plan ahead here. So the horizon year that we're using is 2041. So we're planning 20 years out, right? So if you think about 20 years back was 2001. The volume of traffic that you saw on local streets in Whitby 20 years ago was significantly less than what you're seeing today. And what we're seeing is with the growth in the region, with I forget there's 215,000 people moving just into the corridor along Dundas Street, another 55,000 jobs. We're seeing a significant desire for more travel and a significant increase in pressure on the roadways. And yes, the road works today on good days. It doesn't work in snowy weather or when there's an accident on Highway 401. But what we're seeing is that it's going to become less and less reliable as traffic grows. And we get to a point where traffic very quickly goes from flowing well to not flowing at all. And that is really only about another 10% of traffic on Dundas Street. And what we're seeing in the growth model is we're seeing at least a 20% increase in traffic demand over the next 20 years. Now, with COVID, that might be a few years further out, or we might see more even traffic all the way through the day with less peak hour travel and more all-day travel. But we do know that over time, traffic is going to grow to this level, and we need to have the priority to get a reliable service so that people who can will make the choice to move to public transit, taking pressure off the road and off the growth in traffic.
Great, thank you so much. So we'll go to our next question now, which is coming from Patrick. Patrick has asked that I read his question out. So his question is, when will we see the real on-the-ground vehicle measurements from vehicle counters? Your data is years old and therefore no longer valid. Panelists?
So when we do these kinds of studies, we do always have to rely on information that we have. So there is a major survey done once every 5 years in the Greater Toronto Area called the Transportation Tomorrow Survey. It is a major undertaking. It actually takes 3 years to analyze the data that comes in from that. It is used as the basis for all of the transportation planning decisions in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. We do recognize that that information is a little bit out of date. We do regular traffic count updates on about a 2 to 3 year cycle. We do have the streetlight data, which is the best pre-COVID information that we have from 2019. It actually ran from February 2019 to January 2020. So it really is just before the pandemic set in. So really, that is the best baseline data that we could possibly have to work on this project. We also know that this model is very robust. It's been used to plan Highway 407, to plan Highway 401. It's used by MTO. It's used by all the municipalities. So we do know that it's a very robust model, and we do know that what we're seeing for 2041 is a significant growth in demand for travel given the growth in the region. As I mentioned, Durham is the fastest growing region in the Greater Golden Horseshoe and has been for the last 5 to 7 years, and it's going to continue. So all we're going to see is more and more pressure for more people traveling on the roadway. And what we're trying to do is create a viable alternative by creating a reliable service to give people more options in the corridor. We've seen this applied on the Viva system. When we were building that system, the traffic data that we used in the EA was 2 to 3 years old. The ridership projections that we made in 2003 about what that project would be delivering in 2020 are very close to what's actually happening. So we believe the model we have is very robust. The data processes that we're using and the way we're applying all of this information is industry standard. This is the way these kinds of projects are planned. We do understand that COVID is likely going to mean that what we think is going to happen in 2041 may be pushed out a couple of years, or we may see less peaking where we see less of a huge demand for everybody to be at the office at 9 o'clock, but we're going to see more midday demand, which actually helps us in the transit world because we don't have to have as many peak hour buses that sit around idle during the middle of the day. Either way we split it, we are going to see in the next 20 years such a significant increase in traffic through Whitby that we need this service, or we need some form of transit service to make sure that the roads continue to operate.
And David, I just add on to that, and with the introduction of the Pulse back in 2013, 2014, it's far exceeded its expectations and really demonstrated the latent demand for public transit that our community has. And as you know, we still have a lot of work to do to expand that service, and with the BRT dedicated lanes, ensure it's reliable. But even now, it continues to be our highest used route with the highest ridership. And as we make it more reliable, we fully expect, again, to attract more ridership and getting people out of their cars and onto public transit.
Wonderful. All right, we're going to go to our next question, which is a quick one, and I've been asked to read it as well. When will CP be replacing its bridge? David,
so we've already had we've had some detailed discussions with CP already. We have talked to them. We have a general design for an expanded bridge. The bridge would actually be replaced as part of this project, so that is part of the cost of this project. CP was quite happy about that. They love when Metrolinx and other road authorities give them new infrastructure. So the design at the conceptual level has already been approved. It's a fairly typical design. So it's a 2-track bridge. So we would demolish one half of the bridge, expand it to make to account for the 6 traffic lanes plus the cycling facilities plus the sidewalks, move the track onto the new half of the bridge, and then rebuild the other half. So it's a very typical process, and we already have approval in principle for CP to do that. When it would happen is part of the funding decision. So when is the funding available for all parts of this project? When does this particular segment of roadway get slotted in is something we're still working on. So at this point, we don't know exactly when we're going to widen between Garden and Anderson, or between Anderson and Thornton. But once we get there, where everything is lined up, CP have told us they would like about 18 months notice to be able to make all the arrangements for that bridge to be replaced. And that fits very nicely with our detailed design and construction cycle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're going to go to our next question, and it's coming from Dawn. Dawn, if you want to unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Jenny. I am in favor of the 4-lane bus on the curb proposal, primarily because you have told us that that was your preferred layout. To me, it makes sense that you, being a transportation authority, would know better than our town council as to what the best way is to get people through the town. Now, my concern with going to 3 lanes is primarily emergency response, fire, ambulance, police. With the lanes narrowing, it will, in my opinion, reduce response times to emergencies. In the past, Whitby has had several significant fires in the heritage area, at least 3 I can think of, where the roads were closed for a few days at a time for fears that the facade would fall into the middle of the street. And then there was weeks after that where at least 1 lane was taken up by construction and preserving the building, that sort of thing. So my concern is if we go down to 3 lanes, who is assuming the liability for the delays in emergency services?
So we have had detailed discussions and meetings with the emergency services department. So we talked specifically with fire and the paramedics. They actually prefer the idea of the BRT lanes being completely separated from traffic because they would have access to use those lanes. So during rush hour, when the curb lane is jammed with cars, they would be able to go through the bus lane and very quickly get across town. We also, in the design, added a signal in front of the fire hall so that when the alarm is sounded, the traffic light would turn red, which would facilitate the fire trucks getting out of the fire hall and getting back in when they need to. So yes, there might be, we're working with them to look at response time through downtown. Generally, they're very much in favor of the segregated bus lanes. The other thing they said is having the buses in a dedicated lane in the middle of the road, they know how the bus is going to react. They know if the bus is along the corridor and there's no stop, but the bus is stopped, then the bus is aware of the fire truck can go around them. And if it's at the stop, they know that they're servicing passengers and will wait. When the bus is in the curb lane and there's mixed traffic, there could be a car in front of the bus turning right. They're not sure whether the bus driver knows that they're coming or not. So from their perspective, they actually prefer the dedicated lanes to mixed lanes. So we are working with them to make sure that response times will not change as the design moves forward.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to go
welcome.
to our next question. Again, I've been asked to read this one out. The question is, have EMS been consulted regarding vehicle transitions and access, specifically for the proposal through downtown Whitby? Panelists, over to you.
So yes, as I mentioned, we did have a very focused meeting with Whitby Fire and with the paramedic service. We've also met with the police force, so they're fully aware of what the design does with the center median, limiting left-hand turns. They are reviewing now whether there are any places where they would like to see more of a drop curb so that they can more easily navigate across the street. So that will be something that we'll work on through detailed design. But yes, we have very clearly been working with them to make sure they're working with the system. They've also been talking to York Region, because York Region has had the dedicated median lanes on Highway 7 for a number of years now. So they've also been talking to them about how it modified response time and how to best you take advantage of the BRT lanes during peak periods. So yes, all of those emergency services issues are being managed and will be documented in the EPR.
Thank you for that. All right, we have our next question now coming from Nikki. Nikki, please unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Okay, just one quick comment. It would be appreciated going forward if we could have the materials in advance. A lot of the speakers at the beginning of the session I found were speaking very quickly, and it was very difficult to follow your conversation. So just some feedback that it would be very beneficial to have the materials in advance. My question is around funding. I agree with all of the residents that have put forth our concern, but my bigger concern is the Canadian or the provincial government is looking at a $33 billion deficit. Lord knows what it'll be post-COVID. I, as a taxpayer of Ontario, do not believe that this should be a fully funded project, and I know to date it has not been funded. So could you provide me some further details on funding requirements and when that is expected to be passed?
Yep, thank you. I can take that one. Thank you for your question. So you're right. Today, this is not a fully funded project. So we are, the process is that as we advance through preliminary design, that will enable us to evaluate the costs and evaluate the benefits again. So we're going to do what we call a preliminary design business case that will tell us how much value we're getting out of this investment. So it's an investment. It's not just money going into moved curves, but it's really money that generates savings for the whole regional economy. So that's what I mentioned earlier on in the initial business case that we produced in 2018. The benefits significantly outweighed the cost. So we had the cost estimate was around $500 million in 2018 dollars, and the benefits associated to that were above 680. I had that in an earlier slide. So we know that this project generates more economic benefits than the amount of investment that's put in. So today the objective basically is with the preliminary design, now that it's, once we have the refinement, we're able to really cost it in a much more detailed way than what we did in 2018, and that will be the basis for that business case. We'll recalculate the benefits, understand what are the how is this going to flow back into the regional economy, and make the case for the complete funding. And there are already some segments that will be benefiting from ICIP funding, but maybe I'll let the region speak to that.
Yeah, so through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, the region has already secured about $175 million worth of funding, which covers the Pickering portion, the majority of the segments in Ajax and in Whitby. We are looking to do construction from Lakeridge Road through to Des Newman. So that funding has already been secured and will come off that $500 million that the Metrolinx will be seeking in the future.
And really, just to get back to the benefits, so we know this is also really to support the growth of the region. When we evaluate that in the next 20 years, we'll have more than 200,000 new residents along this corridor and more than 65,000 new jobs potentially. These need that transit service to be able to move around the region, because with the dedicated bus lane, we can move more people per hour than people driving on their own in cars. So this this project, this infrastructure project, like many other transportation projects throughout the region, is really there to support that growth. So there's developers along the corridor, all the businesses, and it just creates a lot of economic opportunity along the corridor. So these benefits are also significant, and it's really, transit is really a condition that supports the growth targets for the community and the prosperity of the community.
Great, thank you so much for that answer. We'll be going to our next person in line, which is Chantal. Chantal, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My question is, will there be additional stop signs along the parallel streets to Dundas to deal with the extra traffic flow? I'm on one of the cross streets. I'm on a street that's perpendicular to Dundas, and if I try to use Mary, it's like a speedway with cars trying to beat the traffic. So I'm just wondering if there'll be extra stop signs for those communities.
Panelist, over to you.
David, you're on mute, but.
Sorry, you'd think I'd had that sorted out by now. Thank you very much for that question. We are working with the town, and we're working with the analysis to see. So there is a warrant process to look at when the amount of traffic using an intersection warrants stop signs and when it warrants moving to traffic signals. So as part of the traffic analysis, we did also test adding some additional stops and some additional traffic signals to manage along Mary and Dunlop. And so there will be some general recommendations coming out of the report, but it really will be monitored by the town and will be added in as traffic grows. So what we're proposing for this growth is not going to happen the day the system opens. It's going to happen over a period of years. So we will see gradually adding more and more traffic controls through the neighborhood as traffic generally grows, but that is being planned for.
Okay, thank you so much. Chrissy, you're next.
Welcome.
Please unmute yourself and you may ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, sorry for the picture of my dog. I didn't have time to change it. But I have a question, just two-part question. I want to go back to the 4-lane option and the fact that it feels like the Whitby Council decided a couple years ago that this was the best option to take off the table, the 4-lane option. Yet here we are, and as far as I can tell, residents want the 4-lane option back on the table. So the elected officials appear not to be did not work in our favor. I don't think anyone even was asked about the 4-lane option, and it is technically preferred by Metrolinx. So it feels like the residents want 4 lanes. Metrolinx thinks 4 lanes is the best option. The only people who think it isn't is Whitby Council. Well, half the council and the mayor, which is 5-4, is my understanding that the vote took place. I don't know when, a couple years ago. So based on that, based on all the response from residents who want the 4-lane option as a consideration back on the table, I think with curbside lanes, that's what I'm hearing amongst my group. And and in addition to that, why do we have to have a right turn lane onto Brock from Dundas heading westbound? If we eliminate that, then you can have 4 lanes through buses on curbside. Would that work? Is that an option?
So, sure, that's some great questions there. So, just to be clear, the technically preferred solution is not the 4-lane with curbside. The technically preferred solution, now that we understand the community issues and understand the priorities of the town, is the 3-lane option. When we initially proposed the curbside option in 2018, that was intended to drive discussion. It was intended as what was technically preferred primarily from a transportation perspective. But what we've heard in terms of balancing all of the needs of the community, that what we're moving towards is the 3-lane solution. That 3-lane solution is also supported by council and we're working through the approvals with town staff. So what was the original technically preferred solution we've moved on from that based on additional information about local impacts and local priorities outside of what we knew at the time. So really the 3-lane option is the technically preferred solution. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question?
Oh, it was about turning right onto Brock Street northbound from when you're heading westbound on Dundas.
Yeah, westbound to northbound, yes. So that is a fairly heavy right-hand turn. We see about 140 cars an hour doing that based on our analysis. So if we were to remove that lane or make it change its purpose, those cars would instead turn up Perry or Ash or Hickory and go across Mary to get back out to Brock. So we see that that is such a heavy move that it makes sense to keep it there unless we can find some ways to counteract the impacts of those cars infiltrating the neighborhood east of Brock Street and north of Dundas. Of all of the turn movements that are allowed at that intersection, that is by far the highest. And there are very few alternates because of the road network in the northeast quadrant of downtown.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're going to go to our last questioner now. Murray, you had a question about how the benefits are calculated. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes. How are the benefits calculated at $650 million? Because I have a hard time believing that spending $500 million to build a transit project that delivers very few riders has economic benefits of that magnitude. So my guess is that your calculations were based on something like the amount of construction activity that takes place and you know, these fictitious multiplier effects that economists like to use now and then. Because by that definition, all we have to do really is spend $500 million on anything random in the community. And I think there are some things that would be much more beneficial to our community, like local transit that doesn't really work. I know the funding sources would be different, or any other kind of project that would benefit the local community. But to say that $500 million of our taxpayer money to be spent on a project delivering very few people has an immediate benefit of $650 million defies logic, because then we should just all get together and just build things. Apparently we'll all just benefit by that somehow. I'd like to know where that comes from.
Thank you, Murray. Panelists, over to you.
Yep, so I'm happy to take that question. Thank you. So it is not the way we get to these benefits and the way we calculate them is not using these multiplier effects. So there we're really looking at both kind of direct benefits to transit users, so and to, I would say, people moving across the region. So it's the amount of time that people are saving through this investment. So whether they're existing transit users or people who will switch over from car to transit because they will save time. So that save time has a value, and that's one element that is being monetized. Another one that we evaluate in there is the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So we know there's a value today for CO2 gases being emitted, and so that is that's important to reduce it, because we know that if we don't reduce it, then there will be costs associated with climate change. So there's a cost to that, and that corresponds also to growing economic costs with carbon taxes and all that. But I won't go down that rabbit hole. The other element that we calculate is the safety benefit. So again, through the hard median on that reduces the number of accidents plus injuries plus deaths, that also has a significant monetary benefit. So it's an economic benefit. So we turn it into dollars, but it's really a benefit to society and to the health of the society. Then I would say there's a whole other range of benefits that we don't, and you're right. For example, all the multiplier stuff, which is, you know, how much money, how much employment you generate for $1 investment, that is not included in that calculation. That comes on top of that. So I would say the estimate that we provide here is fairly conservative, and it's the methodology that's used worldwide to estimate the benefits of transit projects.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So with that, we've come to the end of our question period, and I'd like to thank everybody who asked their live questions. We really appreciate your feedback and the time you've spent with us tonight, as well as all of the informative questions you shared with us. Just a quick reminder that for the questions we haven't yet had a chance to address tonight, we do aim to provide a written response posted on our website within 14 days. So just to let everybody know about that. And with that, I'll bring it back to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you to our panelists and to all the attendees for tonight's conversation. As I said at the outset, your feedback on our services and our project is welcome. We had a number of very good questions on both Metrolinx Engage and on Zoom, and appreciate the interest, passion, and continued input. This evening's presentation and answers to the questions that we weren't able to address will be posted on Metrolinx Engage. We would encourage you to register on Metrolinx Engage to be notified of future Metrolinx events, such as our Public Information Center that will be taking place later on this summer. You can also sign up for updates on the Durham Scarborough BRT by sending us an email at dsbrt@metrolinx.com. Thank you again for taking the time to share your feedback and for the important discussion this evening. Good night, and please stay safe.